Last year, 9 players made their MLB debut in a Mets uniform. How many will they get this year? We're talking prospects on today's show.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're listening to Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day, and thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. On today's Friday Farm Report, we're talking about some prospects who could debut this upcoming season. In the first segment, I'm going to give you 2 locks that will debut this year. We'll also go through who debuted last year. In the second segment, I want to go through 5 of the Mets' top 10 prospects that have a case to debut this season. And then in the final segment, we'll just go through some other names to watch who could make a big league impact this season. Before we get to any of that, though, I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein, covering the New York Mets on this show since the 2019 season. This is the #1 daily podcast on the New York Mets. If you want to find some of my written work, you can do so over at justbaseball.com, where I work as the editor-in-chief. So last year, we all know that the Mets had some high-profile top pitching prospects that made their debut at the end of the season. Noel McLean came up in the middle of August. He now is set to be the Mets' #2 starter behind Freddie Peralta. Jonah Tong made his debut a couple weeks after McLean. Right now, I'd say he's probably 7th on the depth chart to make the rotation on opening day. Actually, no, probably maybe 8th. I would say it depends on how you view Tobias Myers. But if you view him as a starter, then Tong is no better than 8th. And you could make the case that Christian Scott even has a better chance to crack the opening day rotation. I think Jonah Tong needs time in AAA, and there's nothing wrong with that. He only got 2 starts there last year. So Jonah Tong will make a big league impact this year, but it might be a little bit further into this season. Now, Brandon Sproat made his debut with the Mets a week after Jonah Tong. He is now a Brewer from the Freddie Peralta trade. Before that trio made their debut, there was another guy that was once considered a top 10 prospect in the Mets system who made his debut, and that was Blade Tidwell. He made his debut on May 4th, made 2 starts, pitched in 4 games, gave up 15 runs in 15 innings pitched for a flat 9 ERA. It was eventually traded along with Drew Gilbert for Tyler Rogers at the deadline. Dom Hamill, another guy that at one point was a top 10 prospect in the Mets system. He pitched 1 game for the Mets against the Padres, gave up 3 hits and hit a batter in an inning of work, which if you're just looking at the baseball reference page, that's what you see. 1 inning, 3 hits, 1 walk. I looked back to see what happened in that inning. It was actually really an inning plus. He hit a batter, gave up 2 base hits, got an out on a throw at the plate. And then the next inning, he comes back out, gets up a hit, and then got pulled from the game. He would get DFA'd by the Mets. He has later been DFA'd by the Orioles, Rangers, and most recently the Yankees. So Hamill getting passed around a little bit now that he's no longer in the Mets organization. Jonathan Pintaro made his debut last year, 1 appearance, gave up 2 hits, walked 2, picked up a strikeout, and he did get 2 outs overall. He is currently sporting a ERA of 27 on his career because he gave up 2 runs and only got 2 outs. But he is still a guy that should make an impact this year. He made 11 starts in AA last season, had a 3.40 ERA, and struck out a third of the batters that he faced, only walked 8.8% of the batters he faced in AA, gets the call straight to the big leagues, makes that appearance, gets rocked, goes back to AAA, and really had an up-and-down finish to the season. Still struck out 25% of the batters that he faced in AAA, but he walked nearly 16% of the batters that he faced. This is a fun story, though. This is a guy that the Mets picked up out of indie ball. He has a great cutter. Got a good sweeper, solid 4-seamer, as well as a sinker. Changeup hasn't been great. I think this stuff is going to play it more out of the bullpen. You're probably looking at a multi-inning weapon out of the pen, and a guy that, because he's on the 40 and has options, we will be seeing a fair amount this season. Alex Carillo is another one, made his debut on July 8th. Had a 13.50 ERA across 3 appearances. He struck out a ton of batters in the minors. 36.2% of the batters that he faced in the minors, he struck out, but he walked 14.7%, a lot of those in AAA, a walk rate of 19% in AAA. You're going to see a similar theme with a lot of the guys we talk about today. Nasty stuff, great swing and miss stuff, a lot of strikeouts, control issues. That's what you're going to get into with minor league relievers. It's why these guys aren't starters anymore, because they didn't have the command to be a starting pitcher, and you try to see if that stuff will play up out of the bullpen for Carillo. It absolutely does. Throws 98, has a good slider, a nasty split, but it's still a work in progress. He was a minor league signing, though, so another good kind of diamond in the rough the Mets found that could make a pretty big impact this year if he can grab one of those bullpen spots. Justin Hageman made his debut last year with the Mets, was pretty effective, 4.56 ERA, and ate up 23 2/3 innings for the Mets in a up and down swingman role. Hayden Sanger was the final guy that made his debut for the Mets last season. Was that the only position player? I guess I think it was. Yeah. So 8 pitchers, 1 position player, and Sanger, of course, is the Mets' third catcher. He still has options, so he'll be in Syracuse to start the season, barring injuries to Torrens or Alvarez, and is a great defensive catcher that has a chance to be like the backup catcher of the future for the Mets because he's that good defensively. So 9 debuts in 2025. And I also, before we get to the next segment, have 2 absolute locks that we don't have to spend too much time on who will make their MLB debut for the Mets this season. The first one's obvious. I did a show about him this week, and that is Carson Benge. Carson Benge will likely make his debut on opening day, starting in left field, where his first at-bat in the big leagues could very well come against Paul Skeens. So not a great place to start as far as having to face maybe the best of the best as your welcome to the big leagues moment, but also a guy that's going to have a huge role on this team. Not maybe the Mets' most impactful rookie, because that'll probably be Nolan McLean, but McLean has already debuted. Carson Benge, not even on the 40-man roster yet. Again, he will likely be added on the 40 when he's added to the active roster to start this season, or he might have 6 weeks in AAA to start the year if he struggles in camp, in which case you still expect him to eventually become the Mets starting left fielder. The last layup of a guy that will debut this season is Dylan Ross. Dylan Ross was added to the active roster for the final series of the season against the Marlins, but he never got in there to make his debut. He's another flamethrower that has a walk problem. Again, the common theme. He struck out 80 batters last year in the minor leagues in 54 innings pitched. In Double-A, he struck out 40% of the batters that he faced, only walked 6.7% of the batters that he faced, gets up to Triple-A, strikes out 35.7% of the batters that he faced, but the walk rate climbed to almost 15%. With that, I should have pulled the ERA in Triple-A. I believe it was an ERA in the ones for Dylan Ross. So despite the walks, he was still finding a way to keep runs off the board. I'm looking at it again here. Dylan Ross had a 1.69 ERA in AAA last season, despite all those walks. He also pitched a little bit in high A. We had a 1.54 ERA in 11 2/3 innings pitched. So this is a guy that absolutely should be up at some point. He's on the 40. He has a chance to break camp if he has a good spring. He's just got to figure out how to fill up the zone. If he can throw strikes, I think there's a pretty good chance that Dylan Ross can actually break camp, especially since the Mets haven't added another reliever through free agency or through a trade. So if things stand as they are, there might be as many as 3 spots available to be claimed in that bullpen mix. I think Dylan Ross, just on a pure stuff basis, there has as good of a shot as anyone. You're going to use his option whenever you send him down to the minor leagues this year. So that's one obstacle you don't have to worry about. He's already on the 40, so it's just a matter of, is he one of the best pitchers that can make it? You don't have a ton of guys that are out of options that are competing for this bullpen mix right now. So there is some openings for a couple of these guys to crack that pen. And I think I'd probably put my money on Dylan Ross over Jonathan Pintaro or Alex Carillo. I think he's the best impact arm of that trio. But again, all of them on the 40, all of them have a chance here in spring training to get that start up in the big leagues and be on the roster for opening day. Next segment, what we're going to do is we're going to look at 5 of the Mets' top 10 prospects and discuss if any of them could make their debut this season. We're going to go through all that in just a minute. Today's episode is brought to you by Indeed. Hiring isn't just about finding somebody willing to take the job. It's about finding the right person with the right background who can actually help your business move forward. And if you want candidates who match what you're looking for, Indeed sponsored jobs is the move. Because instead of hoping the right person just stumbles across your post, Indeed will help match you with quality candidates by boosting your job listing to the people who fit your specific criteria, like skills, certifications, and location. It saves time because you're spending less energy sorting through mismatches. You get specific and you target exactly what you need. And with sponsored jobs, your posts get seen by candidates who are actually a fit. And here is the thing that says it all. In the minute that I've been talking to you, companies like yours have made 27 hires on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. So if you're hiring, spend less time searching and more time interviewing candidates who check all the boxes with Indeed sponsored jobs. Listeners of this show will get $75 in sponsored job credit to help get your job the premium status it deserves at Indeed.com/podcast. That's Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring, do it the right way with Indeed. If you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Help us get closer to our next goal of 16,000 subscribers by opening day. So let's talk about 5 prospects who are probably within the Mets top 10. I think the first one that I'm going to mention here, you can make a case he's still outside the top 10. When I ranked the Mets top prospects earlier this offseason, I ranked Nick Morabito 14th in the system. I had Elian Pena over him, Will Watson, and Chris Suero. You remove Jet Williams and Brandon Sproat that are well within my top 10. You bump up Morabito to maybe that 12 slot. But I think there's plenty of outlets that will have Nick Morabito in the top 10. I know it's just baseball. We did update our top 15 prospects recently after that trade, and Morabito did slide up there. So I still think he fits the criteria of a top 10 prospect in the Mets system, even if I consider him a little bit outside of that. But Morabito deserves first mention in this group that we're going to discuss in this segment because he's on the 40. The Mets had to protect him from the Rule 5 draft because I think there's a lot of teams that would have taken the chance on Nick Morabito in the draft because he's got a pretty solid floor of being a 4th outfielder in the big leagues. And the question is he going to hit enough to be more where he can be a starting center fielder? I think more likely on a second division team, but you never know. You don't want to put a hard ceiling on a prospect that they can't break through. He is still early in his career. He still has only played in Double-A. He will play in Triple-A to start this season, I am sure. And he also is coming off a torrid stretch through the Arizona Fall League. Obviously, it's not a large sample of games. It was 17 games, but he hit 362 in the Fall League, and he stole 16 bases in those 17 games. So really put on a showcase where it became impossible for the Mets to try to sneak him through that Rule 5 draft. He was the Mets minor league player of the year back in 2024, had a great season that started in low A where he hit nearly 400 across the first month of the season, got up to high A and hit about nearly 300. He hit 294, stole 48 bags there, 59 stolen bases overall in that 2024 season. Last year in Double-A across 118 games played, Morabito hit 273, 348 on base, only a 385 slug, still stole plenty of bases, 49 bags in 60 attempts. For Morabito, I think the thing that we talked about throughout his development is how is he going to look as he climb levels? Because Morabito's best trait offensively is his speed. And when you're in the lower levels of the minor leagues, it's so much easier to utilize that speed to get on base. As you climb each level, the defenders get better and better, and it gets harder to get those extra, infield hits. It's harder to steal first base, so to speak. The fact that he still hit 273 across 118 games played at Double-A, that was a solid mark. He still got on base, nearly a 350 clip. The problem is there is so much pressure on getting on base and hitting for a high average because there's just not much slug to his game. I will give him credit. In about the same amount of games played, he did up his extra base hit total by 9. He had 35 extra base hits in 2025, 26 in 2024. He hit 27 doubles, so he added 10 doubles compared to his total the previous season. 2 triples compared to 5 triples, so he had less triples, but overall doubles and triples 29, compared to 22 in 2024. And he improved his home run count by a few, 6 home runs compared to 4 home runs. Never going to be a big home run guy, but if he can continue to hit more doubles and if he can hit for a high average, there is a chance this guy can start in the big leagues. But I think for the Mets this year, you're looking at someone that could come up at some point to probably give you some speed off the base pass, maybe as a September call-up. I don't think that Morabito is going to play a huge role this season, but of the 5 guys we're going to mention in this segment, he's got the best chance to debut because he's on the roster. AJ Ewing is the really exciting prospect that has a chance to very soon be the number 1 prospect in this organization because the 3 guys ahead of him are all in line to graduate soon. Noel McLean will no longer be a prospect, a couple starts into the upcoming season. Carson, Benge also has the chance, within a couple months to be officially, a big leaguer, no longer considered a prospect. Jonah Tong as well. Those are now the top 3 prospects in this system. AJ Ewing, I think, is pretty comfortably now the 4th best prospect ahead of guys that we're going to talk about in a minute, like Jacob Reimer and Ryan Clifford. And it's just because of the whole package. AJ Ewing has a chance to be an above average player all around. A great defender in center field, a guy that can bring you a bunch off the base pass, stole 70 bags last year, and a guy that can be a top of the order, bat that can get on base a ton. I think the big difference between Ewing and Morabito is that ability to get on base. AJ Ewing is, better with his plate discipline. He's going to draw more walks, and there's a little more juice in the bat. Maybe not home run power, but his average exit velocity is better, and he's a guy that, you never know, could grow into a little more home run pot, but it's just a matter of hitting for a high average, getting on base, and then letting that speed do the rest. He's going to start the year in Double-A. I think it's pretty unlikely we see him in the big leagues this year. There's still a fair amount of development that needs to be done. It was only 1 torrid month in Double-A last year for Ewing, but you never know. If the Luis Robert experiment doesn't work and the Mets need a center fielder midseason and Ewing makes quick work of Double-A and ends up in Triple-A, well, then he's a call away. So Ewing is, I think, a big wild card coming out of this system. I would not anticipate a debut this year, but I would not rule one out either. Then we get to Ryan Clifford, number 5 prospect in the system now. He made his way up to Triple-A at the end of last year in 34 games. It's pretty impressive. He still walked at a 15.5% clip, and the strikeout rate was a shade below what it was at in Double-A. Went from 25.9% to 24.6%. So the one thing you always look at when a prospect makes a jump, it's all right, is he maintaining his strikeout and his walk rate? Because if he is, that is a good indication that he's still taking comfortable at bats. And he certainly was. Didn't have the best overall numbers, but he did have the best numbers in AAA of the group that got promoted at the same time: Clifford, Jet Williams, and Carson Benge. He was the best of that trio. He hit 29 home runs last season between Double-A and Triple-A. He was 1 homer away from being the first Mets prospect since Pete Alonso to hit 30 home runs in a minor league season. So I really like Ryan Clifford, and I think he has a chance, outside of course, Carson Benge, to have the biggest impact of a prospect that will make his debut or could make his debut this season, just because I could see a world where if Polanco or Vientos don't work out or one of them gets hurt and you're needing a first base option, Ryan Clifford could be the guy, and he very well might be the first baseman of the future for the New York Mets. So definitely got to keep your eye on this year. If you don't remember how he got to the Mets, he was the other prospect in the Justin Verlander trade. Everyone was talking about Drew Gilbert at the time because he was more well-known. But if you go back and listen to an episode of Locked On Mets in 2023, you can hear me saying I think Ryan Clifford was the real prospect that, there's the real blue chip that they got in that trade. And certainly at this point with Gilbert gone, he's all that's left from that trade, but a really nice prospect that will be fun to watch this season. Jacob Reimer is definitely another guy that has a shot this year because he was in Double-A last season. He actually split his year exactly in half between High A and Double-A. 61 games at each stop. Walked over 10% of the time in each spot. Kept his strikeout rate manageable in each spot, below 25%. Hit 17 homers, 5 triples, 32 doubles for Jacob Reimer. 54 extra base hits. This guy is, right now, it's probably Clifford and Reimer if you're just sort of assuming Benge is already up. Those are the two bats that I think you could be most excited about. But defensively, there is some issues with both. For Clifford, it's just first base, and maybe he can go out and play a little bit of corner outfield. Does have a good arm, but a little bit slower out there. Jacob Reimer, he's a third base prospect, but whether he sticks at third is really going to be a big indicator on if this guy, is a consistent top 100 prospect that's going to keep climbing the rankings, or if he's going to stay in the back half of top 100s and maybe even fall off if he can't play third base. So that's the big thing to watch for him, is to see if he continues to hit, but also can he stick over at third? If he does, that's a really good prospect for the Mets moving forward. I think he's got probably the furthest way to go to make it up to the big leagues, because there's work that has to be done on both sides of the ball. With AJ Ewing, like, you can see if the bat comes along enough, okay, you can stick him in center field and roll. He can still develop more out there. He's still relatively new to center, but for Ewing, there's just not as much that needs to be done with Reimer. It's still adjusting to the upper levels when it comes to the bat. It's kind of in some ways, they have to work on different things. Like, Ewing still has to prove himself more as a hitter. Reimer, though, the glove, like that needs to come along a lot. You don't want another Mark Vientos at third base. And honestly, this year with Bo Bichette there, he's really blocked anyway. So unlikely we see Reimer, but he is worth mentioning in this grouping. And the last guy to mention is Jack Weniger. I am struggling. I used to think it was Jack Weniger, and I'm pretty sure it's Jack Weniger, and I am just butchering it every time. So apologies every time I say his name, and apologies if I'm getting it wrong still. But Weniger, in Double-A last year, he spent the whole season there. He had a 2.92 ERA at 135 and 2/3 innings pitched. He was also awesome in the playoffs and really led that team to a Double-A title. He has a 4-pitch mix. Fastball was sitting 92.5 miles per hour in 2024. He bumped that to 95 in 2025, and he topped that at 98. So the added velo really helped for Weniger. He has a sinker as well as the four seam. So the four seam has that ride up in the zone. The sinker can get ground balls. He has a good slider, but the real weapon is his splitter that tunnels really well at that four seam. And there's a 10-mile-per-hour difference between the fastball and the splitter. So it's just a pitch that drops off the table and is a real weapon for him. He started to work on a little bit of a curveball at the end of the season, so that might give him another look to help his starter arsenal, but he's becoming more and more of a high probability big league starter who has some upside to be a middle of the rotation arm. I'm really excited about Weniger. He's going to start the year in AAA, and he'd have to jump over Tong and Scott and, to a certain extent, Tobias Myers to make it into the big league rotation this year. He's got a long road to get there, just because there's so many things that would have to happen for him to be in line to make his debut. But I think you can make a case that Weniger has the best chance of this group of 5 to be making an impact in September if he is this year's version of, I don't want to say Nolan McClain, like he's going to be that level of a pitching prospect, but more so just the guy that gets called up in the middle of August if the Mets need somebody to make starts out of the system. He's an option. Again, Jonah Tong, obviously a better pitching prospect further along. He's going to get those opportunities first. But Tong's already debuted. So of this grouping of guys, I think Weniger and Clifford are the two that I can see making a bigger impact this upcoming season. Morabito is the one that has the best chance to debut simply because he's on the 40. We got a couple of more names to run through in the next segment. I'm going to be talking about guys who, might make a cameo this season. And who knows, maybe a little bit more. So go through other prospects that could make their debut in just a minute. Today's episode is brought to you by TurboTax. Tax season doesn't have to take over your life. This year, TurboTax is making it easier than ever. Just hand things off and move on with your day. With TurboTax Full Service, you can have your taxes done for you by a trusted local expert start to finish without the stress or the guesswork. Instead of spending hours trying to figure out the forms, you can just meet a local TurboTax expert, and you can meet with them in person or connect online. They're going to handle everything from W-2, self-employed forms, which I had to deal with, and my taxes get really confusing because it's self-employment, and so it's just been so much easier to hand it off to a TurboTax expert and let them do their thing. You upload your documents, go about your day, get updates right in the TurboTax app. It's a huge time saver, gives you peace of mind knowing that an expert is handling it for you. And for a limited time, you can have your taxes done by a local TurboTax expert for just $150 all in. If a TurboTax expert didn't file for you last year, you just have to file by February 28th. So take the taxes off your plate and get back to your life. Visit turbotax.com/local to book your appointment today. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day, and thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. You already live your team every day. Now it's time to take it up a level. Go ad-free. Join the Everyday Club today, and you'll get Locked On Mets without the interruptions. You get access to our Discord, where you can chat with other Mets fans. You can also get access to a merch shop. If you want to be part of the Everyday Club, you can find the link in the episode description, or you can go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Now, we're going to go through a ton of names in this segment of guys that I could just conceivably imagine debuting in a Mets uniform this season. So the first two are NRIs, non-roster invites. I am not going to try to break down what Jose Ramos brings to the table as a 25-year-old journeyman outfielder, but he's got a chance with a great spring to grab the final bench spot, as does Jackson Clough, 29-year-old utility man. Again, if they hit in spring training, we'll learn more about them. Until then, we're not going to mention much because they're probably just depth in Syracuse throughout this season. Joander Suarez is an interesting name because he absolutely burst onto the scene in Double-A in 2023. He started off his Double-A career with 13 no-hit innings. He had 6 no-hit innings in his first start, and then he pitched a 7-inning game. It was a part of a doubleheader, a 7-inning no-hitter. So 13 no-hit innings. And I was like, man, 2023, I remember we were talking about Suarez a lot at the tail end of that season. He's been in Double-A for 2 years since then now. He's a good arm, but it's just kind of just rotation depth in the minor leagues where he's not necessarily considered a top prospect by any stretch of the imagination, but he did have a 3.05 ERA in Double-A last year, got up to Triple-A, had a 9.28 ERA. He made a cameo in Triple-A at the end of the 2024 season. It was right back down to double because of how crowded that AAA rotation might be. When you think about Jonah Tong, Christian Scott, you might have Justin Hageman and Brandon Waddell back in that rotation. Even Tobias Myers can be there. Jack Weniger, like it's going to be a pretty full group in AAA. Joander Suarez might be right back down in Double-A making starts there. But he's close enough to the big leagues that he's worth a mention. He could be this year's Dom Hamill type, where he makes his debut and then he gets DFA'd. And then he gets passed around the league a little bit. We'll see what happens, though. A trio of interesting minor league relievers. All these guys, it's the exact same story we were talking about before. A lot of strikeouts, concerns about the command. Sal Garcia is the furthest away, but he had a sparkling 1.70 ERA last year. And that was across 47 and 2/3 innings pitched. Good fastball slider guy. Finished the year in Double-A. We'll see how far he comes this year, but he is now one of the prospects the Mets have when it comes to relievers. They have to start to pay attention to. Douglas Orlena was awesome in Double-A last year. Had a 1.64 ERA in 33 innings. Great slider, solid fastball, and a curveball. Another guy, though, that it's just a matter of, okay, is he going to keep the ball in the zone? Got up to Triple-A, and he walked as many batters as he struck out. An identical amount, 17 each. On 18 and 2/3 innings pitch, had a 5.30 ERA in AAA. So he'll be back in AAA trying to figure out in that bullpen. And when you're up in AAA, if you're having success, you never know. He could absolutely make his debut this season. The guy that I really like, though, and I can't wait to see him up with the Mets, is Ryan Lambert. Lambert, I love coming out of the draft because he just dominated that draft league that they have prior to getting selected by the Mets. He throws ridiculously hard, over 100 miles per hour. 1.71 ERA in Double-A last year, but what he did in High A was comical. Start of the year there, he faced 28 batters. He struck out 17 and walked 1. So his walk rate was like 5%. His strikeout rate was 60.7%. Clearly was too good for that level. They got him at the Double-A, and he was challenged a little bit more. At least he wasn't striking out, almost 2/3 of the batters that he was facing. Still, though, put up really good numbers. Again, it's a great fastball. The slider, he just has to work on landing it more. If he can get some command of that slider and pair that with that fastball, you have a guy that has high leverage potential. Could be like the Mets closer in 2 years, but there's still a lot that has to be done here. And you never know with these guys. For years, we're all wondering, when's Bryce Montes de Oca going to come up? When he's going to come up? I think he did at one point make a cameo. I can't even recall for sure. Now he's not in the Mets organization, and he's also like shockingly old. I mean, not to knock the guy. I'm sure I might be older than him. Let's see. Who's older, me or Bryce Montes de Oca? He's 29. Okay, so I got him by a year. But he's actually now part of the Nationals organization. So we're going to watch him come up, and he'll be striking out Mets at some point in the middle of May, I imagine. But again, getting back to the trio that are in the Mets system, I really like Saul Garcia, Douglas Orlena, and Ryan Lambert in particular. And I think any and all of them could find their way up in the big leagues at some point this season. One last guy to mention in this regard, as far as, minor league reliever type, Felipe De La Cruz. He had a great start to the season last year, struck out 20 batters in 4 appearances in Double-A. He was still pitching primarily as a starter at that point, gets moved up to Triple-A. And this is at a time where everybody seemingly was coming up to Triple-A when it comes to young pitchers in the Mets system and struggling. Christian Scott did not have problems when he came up to Triple-A for the first time. Nolan McLean did not have any issues when he came to Triple-A, but Brandon Sproat certainly did. Blade Tidwell did. Who else did? Jonathan didn't. He made 2 starts and absolutely carved, so much so that he got the call up to the show from there. But it has been a running theme. Dom Hamill at one point was one of the Mets' top starting pitching prospects. He can never figure out AAA. What's the guy that ended up going to Mike Vassell? I'm like picturing Vassell's face. He went to the White Sox, had a lot of success as a Rule 5 draft pick last year, pitching out of their bullpen in low leverage. But he struggled pitching in Syracuse. So it's been a thing for Felipe De La Cruz. He comes up, makes his first start, gives up 1 hit, doesn't walk a batter, and strikes out 9. It was a pretty jaw-dropping performance. At the time, this was early in the season when the Mets were maybe looking for some arms in the bullpen, and they tried to make him a reliever. I think this was before the Mets actually signed Brooks Raley, and it might have been after A.J. Minter went down. So it was that period where it was, oh, man, this team needs a lefty. Maybe Felipe De La Cruz can be that guy, but it just did not work. He really struggled to the point that he got demoted back to Double-A in August. Good fastball slider combination. I don't think that they should stretch him back out and try to make him a starter. His path in the big leagues is probably out of the bullpen because he really is a 2-pitch guy, but he has a chance still. He's got good stuff. He's still young, so you don't want to just rule him out after 1 bad season. He's a name to watch. I don't know if I would necessarily expect him to come up and make an impact this year. I don't think you can say that about really any of the guys in this segment, but they're all names to watch. So the question then becomes, will the Mets have more guys debut this year than they did last year? And I don't think that they will, because 9 is a pretty big number of debuts. Now, part of that is guys that only made an appearance here and there, and you rack up a bunch of those guys, yeah, you can probably get there. But what we saw at the end of last season with 3 top pitching prospects all inserted into the rotation, I mean, that was an outcome that nobody could have foresaw, because it took a lot of things that went wrong at the big league level to necessitate 3 prospects being inserted into the rotation in a playoff push. So I don't think we'll see that many this year. We're going to see 2 pretty early in the season with Dylan Ross and Carson Benge. I think there is a chance for prospects like Clifford, Ewing, or Reimer to break through if they have just a bonker season offensively and the Mets need to bat one of those spots. Weniger is definitely a name that we're going to watch because he's going to be in AAA to start the season. There's a lot of depth right now in this rotation, but I would view him as part of that depth. I don't think that there's a large gulf between where Weniger is at as a prospect and where Jonah Tong is at as a prospect as far as their development and being MLB ready. Now, Tong is a higher ceiling prospect that deserves to be ranked accordingly, but I think Weniger is going to be a top 100 arm by a lot of outlets once we get into the season a little bit. I think he's even cracked a couple top 100 lists already. So that is the list of names we could see debut this upcoming season. Obviously, Carson Benge, Nolan McLean. If we're just talking about rookies overall, there's going to be a lot of rookie power on this team, a lot of rookie star power on this team. But debuts, my guess, if I had to set the over-under, I'd probably set it at like 5.5. And I'd maybe take the over because you're just going to run into a few that you're not expecting, but not by much. Not by much. So that's going to be all for this edition of Locked On Mets. We'll see if I do any shows this week, and I'll probably get on the mic at some point because you all know me. I just can't help myself, but I don't know if we're going to get much news, and this might be the last weekend I could possibly take because next week pitchers and catchers report, and that's when the news will start to show up in camp where, oh, this guy is in the best shape of his life. He looks awesome. Then there's going to be, oh, this guy's actually hurt, and we're going to have so much to discuss. So make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day, and thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network.